The last 6 weeks since the stay-at-home order have been a constant battle between Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio about whether or not schools remain closed and who is responsible for the pending budget cuts. Businesses and schools kept their doors open for much longer than was healthy for its students and staff, and in essence, the entire city, due to a lack of planning on all levels. As of today, 72 school-based DOE employees, 56 of which were teachers and paraprofessionals, have died. Along with deaths, 15 children aged 2 to 15 have been hospitalized in New York City because they displayed symptoms of a post-immune reaction to COVID-19. The lack of planning on the part of the government not only led to a health crisis, but placed a lot of strain on families and communities that rely on schools in order to get basic necessities met, such as food, mental health and educational services, laundry, and childcare. As businesses began to shut down with fewer people on the trains every day, teachers were told to go to work with no protective gear, just as happened with other workers, and without cleaning supplies. The burden was put on teachers to make sure over 1.1 million students were fed and had a place to go during the pandemic at the expense of our own health. There are over 114,000 homeless children in the New York City public school system. There should have been a plan in place for these children and their families long before schools closed. In fact, these children should have never been homeless in the first place in a country as wealthy as this one. Childcare for essential workers should have been accounted for long before the pandemic hit the United States because our work is needed and have always needed it. Countless students have lost access to the services they need in order to not just do their best learning, but to make it through their day-to-day. Many students across the city receive counseling services. They receive speech therapy and occupational services. They receive assistive services and have providers that are there to make sure they can learn and grow. There are students receiving tutoring services or programs to help them prepare for college. Students with disabilities sometimes rely heavily on programs that teach them how to be independent that are only available to them through school. None of this was taken into consideration leading up to the school's closing, and because of it, thousands of students will literally be unable to learn because their needs don't allow them to access the curriculum through remote or distance learning. Many of these resources were already scarce and hard to come by pre-pandemic. With schools closing and no government official capable of enacting a plan that would make sure our students and their communities can thrive, these resources are not just scarce, but completely inaccessible, exacerbating the issues of inequity in New York City public schools. Budget cuts to education will mainly impact schools in poor Black and Latino communities, schools that were already struggling to make ends meet even before the proposed budget cuts. Cuomo asserts that 20% will be cut from the education budget if we do not receive federal aid. In addition to those cuts, Mayor de Blasio also proposed city budget cuts, which will amount to a total of $2 billion in budget cuts over the next 4 years. $100 million of those dollars will be coming out of the Fair Student Funding budget, which helps to cover the amount of money each school can spend per student. In a city where 85% of students are of color and 73% are labeled economically disadvantaged, this is huge. The equity and excellence for all programs, which are central to students' graduation and college enrollment rates, will also be taking a major blow as $54 million is taken away from those programs. Universal pre-K expansion has been cut, as well as a complete overhaul of the Student Youth Employment Program, which provides jobs to 14 to 24-year-olds in New York City. With budget cuts also comes a hiring freeze, leaving positions vacant when teachers and other employees, such as social workers and guidance counselors, retire. We have 3 teachers retiring from my school this year and are scrambling to find a way to fill those positions. The budget cuts proposed by the city and state will only exacerbate the issues faced by the city's 1.1 million students. New York City public school classrooms from first grade through 12th have approximately 32 students per class. Increasing class size in overcrowded schools is not an option if we want our students to do their best learning. The inequities students and their families face are already noteworthy. Cutting the budget will push New York City public schools into an even deeper crisis, a crisis we may not be able to bounce back from. Once again, the onus is being placed on teachers to teach through the storm without the support and resources we need. We were forced to work through our contracted spring break and are not being paid for it so that children would stay inside. We were forced to be ready within a week's time to launch new remote learning platforms and resources for students. Right now, chapter leaders are unable to file grievances to the union using the online platform, in essence, being unable to report any contract violations. This crisis is making it an excuse to bypass union rights. Remote learning does not support student growth. It actually deepens inequities among students. Not everyone, including educators, has access to a computer, the internet, or even a space in which they can be productive. It creates further gaps in education where there were already gaps and sets students, especially students living in poverty, students with disabilities, and ESL students up for failure. On top of everything, Cuomo just announced a partnership with the Gates Foundation to reimagine education in this new normal, aka privatizing education. In order to take care of our students, we need to use the money we have to make mass testing accessible to all and to mobilize the masses to fight for our right to quality healthcare, especially when we are in the middle of a global pandemic. Without mass testing and a public health mobilization, we will not be able to return to school safely, and the youth, especially the Black and Latino youth of this country, will suffer, whether they are students with disabilities or not. Thank you.
We know some like Jeb Bush have called for distance learning to become the new normal. Now, as someone who works with very young students, 5 and 6 years old, you might have a response to that. Is distance learning a substitute for classroom teaching?
Absolutely not. Distance learning is not a substitute at any level of schooling, but it's definitely not a substitute at the kindergarten and first grade level for children who are 5 and 6 years old. At that age, they are very concrete thinkers. They need their curriculum to be hands-on. They need to touch things. They need to feel things. Another aspect of school at that age is socializing. Socializing is like the biggest part of going to kindergarten and learning how to engage with people, how to problem solve, how to negotiate, how to work through difficult moments, and depending on the teacher, like how to organize for things that they need. And so how can you do that through distance learning? You can't. These kids, 5 and 6 years old, they can hardly even operate a computer. So, it exacerbates, like I said in my talk, the inequities, in our community, and it doesn't help anyone.